Welcome back to the Brilliant People podcast by executive search firm Assertitude. I'm your host, Linnea Jungnelius. Today, I'm joined by someone who is reimagining what value creation can look like in private equity, Tory Ramaker, senior partner and co-head of Portfolio Resource Group at the Vistria Group, a private investment firm that seeks to invest in essential industries where financial returns and societal impact go hand in hand. Tory has built the PRG from the ground up, shaping a model that meets the moment, embedding early, driving transformation, and surrounding CEOs with the right resources and real partnership. Tory, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here in New York.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Fantastic. We're going to dive right in. And before we get to your work at Vistria, let's rewind. Where did your journey begin and what shaped you in those early years?
I'd say the journey began at University of Illinois, where I was a finance major and didn't go to college knowing exactly what I wanted to do. While I was there, I enrolled in a couple of military history classes just out of interest, and through that ended up becoming part of the ROTC program. Did a whole bunch of other extracurriculars while I was there, but probably spent the most amount of time in ROTC. While I was there, I had an injury at Army Airborne School, somewhere between junior and senior year. So pretty quickly had to pivot and figure out what I was going to do next. At 21 years old, there was no way I was prepared to have to pivot. I had a professor who coached me through it. I had never heard of investment banking. I had never heard of consulting. He told me I should try both. He told me which firms to apply to. And as you pointed out, I ended up going to Goldman Sachs in investment banking. And so it worked out. It taught me an important lesson, though, about being willing to be open-minded and try new things.
And look, you like you said, your path has been incredibly dynamic, and you've led across finance, consulting, and also in operating roles. How did you get to where you are today? Could you quickly walk us through the chapters? And as you look back on those, how did they build on each other?
So I'd say the first few chapters were pretty well scripted. If you go to investment banking, you're probably going to go to business school, at least back in the 90s you were. So I left Goldman Sachs, went to Harvard Business School, and then because I had toyed around with the idea of management consulting when I was leaving Illinois, I really wanted to try it for my summer internship. So went to McKinsey for my summer internship while I was at HBS, and then joined them after business school and spent 4 years. Like many consultants, I went to a client, was working on the spinoff of the hospital products division of Abbott Labs, and ended up joining there in a role that, back to being flexible, they just made a role for me. And I wasn't at all qualified to do it, but they gave me the opportunity. I really wanted to be a general manager. After about 6 months, they put me in a general manager role. I did that for a few years and then went to another hospital products company called Baxter and ran corporate business development, rebuilt that group, and then back into professional services with the middle market focused, growth focused consulting firm called Blue Ridge Partners, and then joined Vistria 6 years ago.
As you think about those chapters, is there any particular moment that stands out to you in terms of helping you mature and grow in your career or even as a leader?
Definitely. When you work in investment banking and consulting, you work with a lot of very logical, data-driven, analytical people. And the method of influencing is using data, facts, analysis to bring your colleagues along with you. When you go into the corporate world, most people don't operate that way. People are driven by vision and values and personal appeal. And so working in a couple of big, complex global organizations, you learn a lot about how to navigate, how to influence, what will get someone to do one thing versus another as you're trying to bring them along. And I'd say really importantly, there is no perfect answer. Unlike consulting or investment banking where the analysis says this is what you do, in corporate it's never that clear. And so you just kind of want to make sure you're going in that general direction.
Only because you're here, let's talk about it. Influencing, such a critical skill of operating partners in private equity. How do we get better at that?
So I'm not perfect by any means. I think having walked in the shoes of the people that I support goes a long way. Having the empathy, understanding that it's not as simple as putting something on paper and then it's going to work out that way goes a long way. And being able to speak their language, appreciate the challenges they have, and be understanding, while at the same time, as the sponsor holding them accountable, is important.
So it's sort of like you have to go in, listen first, understand, and then from there, knowing individual motivations, knowing what's important, marrying up a data-driven approach with an empathetic approach that touches the individual on a more personal level. Is that
Right.
fair, how you merge those two?
I think that's right. Building trust. And I would say it's not just listening up front, it's listening throughout. Because you're never close enough to the business yourself
Yeah.
to really know everything going on. And then being supportive
Yeah.
and helping them be successful. If they're successful, we're successful, our investors are successful.
Going back to your track, you moved from advising to operating. What changed in how you think and how you work on that journey?
The perfect answer when you're working in consulting, you'll do your analysis, you'll come up with recommendations, you'll test them with the rest of your team, you'll present them. They can be, at least when you're earlier in your career like I was, reflect back, I think sometimes they were naive, not having operated in a company environment, just naive. You fast forward once you go through that process and you see that just because it's on paper, it doesn't always work out that way, and you understand it's difficult. You have to be willing to adapt and course correct. I think that the appreciation for that gives you that empathy that when you're working with portfolio companies, you can help them do that same thing.
Super important. And thinking about the journey from advising to operating, and then Vistria came next, what pulled you into Vistria, and what made you want to move inside of a firm to build something right from the ground up? Because the PRG, you stood it up from scratch.
Right. Well, Vistria is one of my two biggest clients when I was at Blue Ridge, and got to know everyone. It was much smaller than it is today, but knew everyone, felt comfortable really with the culture, had helped them on projects through Fund 1 and Fund 2, and so as Vistria was raising Fund 3, we started talking about launching this group. When I was at Hospira, earlier in my career in that general manager role, it was starting a new business within a business. And then at Baxter, I rebuilt the corporate business development group. And so I had done it twice, I enjoyed it, and the opportunity to do that again at Vistria with people I knew and really liked was exciting to me.
And take us back to those early days of the PRG.
Yeah.
What did the model look like? What was the first idea behind it? And what were you trying to solve for?
We started off with a generalist-only model. And the reason we did that was twofold. One was resources, right? We were starting this new group. We didn't really know how much money we wanted to allocate to it. And so rather than saying we're going to pick one functional specialist, we said let's pick a generalist who could come and do a bunch of different things. The other reason we did it is Vistria's got a very unique model where we have what we call our operating partners are generally semi-retired CEOs or business unit presidents who are working directly with our companies, not within the portfolio resources group. And so that's always been part of Vistria's special sauce. What I observed before I joined Vistria is that group of operating partners would give very sage advice to management teams. Too often, though, management teams didn't have the capacity, people on their teams, to take those great ideas and turn them into action. And so one of the reasons we started with a generalist model is the idea of having that generalist partner with those operating partners to support management teams on these great ideas and help turn them into action.
That makes a lot of sense. And then what sort of signals or lessons prompted the shift from that original structure of the former CEO archetype, if you will, to what you've built today? How your structure now and how your thinking has evolved certainly has changed as the times have changed.
So during the first 2 years of the Portfolio Resources Group, we observed, maybe not universally, but almost every time we were working with a company, they needed help on technology, they needed help on human capital and really building out the executive team, and they needed help on finance. We invest in middle market companies, lots of opportunity for growth, but there are things that have to be put in place in order to enable that growth. And those three functions, and I would add commercial. We haven't added a commercial person, but I would say those handful of functions were just from time and time again appeared to be areas where we could add value.
And as you think about those 3 or 4 areas, what kinds of talent or capabilities really matter in those buckets of tech, talent, and finance?
So on the technology side, we debated a former CIO versus a product leader, someone who had been working in I'll call it a general management capacity, but overseeing a technology product. We went with the latter because we wanted that, not that CIOs don't have the business savvy, but we wanted someone who was business first with all of those technology skills to work with our company. So that was what we searched for there. On the finance side, we went with someone who is a 2-time private equity-backed CFO. So back to walking in the shoes of the people you're supporting, he had done that, and previously had worked in a resources group. Then on the talent side, we have gone with people who've worked in executive search firms.
And what's next? Where are the skills and the capabilities and needs evolving to now?
So I think on the functional specialist side of things, we're going to stick with those 3, maybe add cybersecurity, maybe add commercial, to be determined. On the generalist side, the generalists we started off with were people who were called 4 years out of business school, had finished their engagement management years with the McKinsey or BCG, and 3 have actually since gone into portfolio companies on the executive team. So they're still within the Vistria family, but doing great things for us in other ways. As we think about the future generals, we'll probably go with people who have more operating company experience. So the consulting, but also call it 5-10 years working in operating companies, so that they can be more effective, more influential as they support our management team.
It brings a lot of credibility to the table and that instant trust with management, I think.
Credibility, and I would say the instincts that may not come naturally to someone, or the seasoning and pattern recognition that may not come naturally with someone who doesn't have that. We've had great people on our team, but I think we got lucky. Sometimes you bring folks in out of consulting, they know how to diagnose, but they don't necessarily know what to do with that diagnosis. And that operating partner group, the retired, semi-retired CEOs who are working with our companies, can often provide that. But having people in PRG who are standalone in that way, working with the CEOs and their teams, I think will take us to the next level.
So you talked a lot about the types of experiences you brought in. What about the types of people? So as you think about the PRG, what tells you that someone will thrive in your model?
So I use those terms, the term client handling skills. And I think that is important. That's why I've always liked the people coming out of consulting firms. The board, the investment team or operating partners, the people who sit on the board are the ones being more directive to management. I've always viewed our role as being more supportive while wearing the hat of a sponsor. So we still need to be assertive. We still need to challenge. But I don't know that our role is to direct. I think that's better the board. So having people on the team who can strike that balance between having that client service mentality with a little bit of edge, with a little bit of assertiveness, but the balance is really important because otherwise management teams will shut you out. You won't get the access you need to be helpful.
Any lessons learned through that evolution? Because the more firms you talk to, almost more questions than answers a lot of times, and curious what you've discovered really works and anything that doesn't.
So I would say what we've learned and how we've evolved our engagement model over time is fewer companies, deeper. Really rolling up sleeves, getting in the trenches. If early on our generalists were, I'd say, somewhat diluted across too many companies. We tried to support, we're doing a lot of deals back in 2020, 2021. I'd say we tried to support too many companies, and they were just another smart voice on a phone call. As we matured, we started really digging in and saying, okay, pick 2 to 3 companies where you can really make an impact. Be very deliverable focused. And this goes for this functional specialist too. What are we going to deliver with the team? When are we going to do it? And let's measure our success against that. That has gone a long way to having impact. And then I would say what we have learned collectively, my partners and I, is when we go into value creation planning early on in the relationship, it has to be management's plan. Too often we spend months, if not years, on an investment thesis. We're diligencing the industry. We find a couple targets. We eventually invest in one. We've got a lot of preconceived notions about what's going to drive value that may or may not align with management. And if we are too overbearing with our ideas, however well-intentioned, and management doesn't own the plan, it's not going to get executed. And so we really try to make sure that management is defining the initiative, the priorities, that we're coming up with an implementation plan that everyone agrees with, and that all heads are nodding in the same direction.
How do you achieve that alignment practically in person? Do you lock yourselves in a room? When do you do it? How do you systematize or document these sorts of things?
So we start as early as possible, even before we've locked up a deal. And our investment team's on point at that moment in time. They will start socializing our hypotheses about the value creation plan. The CEO may or may not be candid about his or her agreement, but at least we're starting to talk and he or she knows what we think. As we get past the point of signing, if we can pre-close, get in a room with our operating partners, the PRG folks who are going to work with that company, the investment team, and start talking about where's the business today, where does it need to go, and how are we going to get there. Starting to put the contours around a value creation plan. Reading body language is really important. And so you can tell if the management team members in the room aren't fully on board. And then we have to sometimes just restrain ourselves from being so exuberant about what our ideas are and listen to management. Starting that pre-close is good, but what we've learned is you need to allow enough time post-close for management to catch their breath, for them to reflect on what the priorities will be going forward in the specific initiatives. Getting to a point where management and the board are aligned, there's a plan on paper, we've got a transformation office set up, and we're off to the races.
Another word I want to pick up on that you dropped in earlier was, as you've evolved your model, you've really helped to better define what success looks like. How have you gotten better clarity around that, and how has that evolved?
So I'd put our support in three areas. One is just upfront value creation planning. And success there is having a plan that is agreed upon and that gets executed. And measurement is based on quality execution of the plan over time. The second bucket is specific initiative support. Let's say 2 years into the hold, 3 years into the hold, whether it's the generalists or a functional specialist, a CEO or a deal team may call and say, hey, we're having trouble with forecasting, right? We got a couple of negative surprises. We just need to upgrade that. So getting really clear that in 3 months, we're going to have a new process for forecasting, and we're going to make some system changes that enable better data for real-time decision-making, and we say this will be done by this point, and then we measure our own progress, just like we measure our management team's progress on value creation planning.
Yeah.
That's become very evident as a key to success.
Those are really nice measures as a team, right? And is that also how you hold your individual people in your group accountable? So they're attached to those initiatives or those work streams, and that's how they then report up and gets measured on how they achieve their part of the whole, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of one and the same. So there might be a technology project, and my colleague who focuses on technology will lay out on paper, here's what we're going to do. It may or may not be overly formal, but I ask for the CEO to look at that and agree. And my perspective is if the CEO is not involved, then the project isn't going to be impactful enough for us to change the outcome on the investment. And so asking the CEO to look at that deliverable, the timeline, and agree on it. Again, while some may call that overly formal, I think that's important to ensure that everyone's got a vested interest in getting the right outcome.
Yeah. Look, you've already touched on some of the things that make your team distinct and how it's embedding itself and driving impact across the portfolio. But is there anything else you would call out about how you do things differently or in a way that really aligns with your firm and your fund strategy?
We are very impact focused. Think quality, outcomes, increasing access with our products. Workforce, the more people who feel included, the lower your turnover, the better your company is going to be. You could go on and on. We think it's really important to integrate that into everything we do. So the other part of the Portfolio Resources Group is our impact and policy team led by my partner. And as we go through value creation planning, we certainly integrate that. And then they will also, just like the functional specialists on the growth and operations side that I lead, they will also dig in on workforce initiatives. They have a playbook for tracking quality and outcomes. So we think that's important as well.
And when you talk about partnering with management, I think that's such a big piece of unlocking all these initiatives and transformations that we talk about. How do you engage with CEOs and your investment teams in a way that's truly effective? And again, through that journey that you walked us through from pre to post and everything in between.
Well, we talked about credibility earlier.
Yep.
That's critical. And then having the ability to build a trust-based relationship. If we're doing it right, we will find ourselves in the difficult position of a CEO or a management team member confiding something in us that they would rather our colleagues not know. Fine line, but you want to be in that position where they are confiding in you and trust that you're not going to run back with every concern they've got to the investment team. But getting to the place where they trust you like that, where they call you and say, I'm really struggling with this, what do you think? Going above and beyond just the specific project you're working on or initiative you're helping with, that's when you're in a position where you can really help that company.
So achieving that trusted advisor status, because again, you got to get to where the bodies are actually buried to then help come with solutions, right?
Yes, you want them to say, we're not doing this well, and we don't know how to fix it. Can you help us? Then to your point, you don't find out where the bodies are buried, and you don't end up with the successful outcome you're looking for.
So if I'm the CEO or any other officer in the C-suite of a portfolio company, what advice do you have for management teams that haven't worked on PE before? How they, one, can get the most value out of these value creation teams, and just how to partner more effectively?
So first and foremost, recognize that we're all on the same team. Secondly, understand that we want you to have the autonomy to run your business. We can't run it for you. At certain points, certainly up front, we're going to be really close to help and support and make sure things stay on track. Embrace that. Don't resist it. If things go sideways over time, we may also jump in and be a little closer, but be open to our help, recognize we're on the same team, and if we all are moving in the same direction, we're all going to make a lot of money.
That's great advice. And what about you? How do you personally show up in the work, and what's the role that you play inside of all of this?
So I am, I'd say, a bit of a player coach. I will most of the time have one or two companies that I'm working very closely with, whether it be a new deal or a company that's going through a transformation. And then I also have responsibility for helping monitor the portfolio and knowing what's going on in all of our 30-plus companies, so that with scarce resources, my investment partner colleagues can all decide where do we deploy those scarce resources.
When you think about deploying resources, one question I also have, because I think this is one of the tricky situations, is when you have multiple stakeholders involved, how do you then decide how to allocate or not, and who takes the lead or not? Do you have views on that?
I've got a lot of experience. I think more and more deals have co-investment, whether it's 50-50 or a third, over-communicate. So in the situations where we've done that, the deal teams and I and my counterpart at the other firm, if the other firm's got a resources group, just speak candidly about what do we need to support, who's got the resources, is one of the firm's PRG group going to be on point completely, or does one firm provide the talent operating partner, another firm provide the generalist, another firm provide, or the same firm provide technology. Just being really clear about roles and responsibilities. It can still be messy, which gets to the over-communication throughout the process. Just have to be constantly talking and just being open and honest about what's working and what's not.
What about some of the thoughts around, I feel like these are some of the common questions too, like taking a board seat, not, charge models. Where do you guys land on some of those things?
There's probably no perfect answer. I personally have not taken board seats. My concern is when you're in a board role, you're in an evaluative capacity of the people you're supposed to support. And so I worry a bit that creates an awkward dynamic. I know a lot of firms do charge specifically for projects. I worry that similarly creates an awkward dynamic. In my opinion, it's better that they feel they can call you without having to worry about being asked for money, especially given that everyone's trying to manage to a budget.
So again, it comes back to alignment at the end of the day and what's your mission, so your model and your mission are aligned. So let's talk about the art of driving change, which is the big thing that we're all trying to do here. With AI and data science accelerating, are you starting to think differently about the capabilities of your portfolio resource group and where it's going next?
So we have explicitly chosen not to add someone at this time. My belief is the technology is advancing so quickly that if we were, well, one, it's very hard to know what you need, what skill set you need. And I worry that if you bring someone in and they start only working in our portfolio, 6 to 12 months later, their knowledge is somewhat stale. And so we've elected to use an internal working group for internal Vistria purposes, but also supporting our portfolio companies, really push the identification of potential use cases, the prioritization, and then tap third parties to help us implement where opportunities arise.
Great point of view. Looking ahead, how do you see the next chapter of portfolio support evolving in light of longer hold periods, increased operational pressure, transformation as the default? Because the whole model of private equity has been evolving in this direction now for a long time.
Well, hopefully the longer hold periods phenomenon starts to change when we get back to a more normal environment. I think, first of all, prioritization will always be important. So if you have longer hold periods in your existing portfolio companies and you're doing new deals and your portfolio grows, you will always have the question of where do you allocate people. And there's never enough capacity to do everything you want to do. So that's one, just being ruthless about prioritization based on if a project's not going to grow EBITDA faster than it would otherwise grow, or it's not going to expand the multiple, then we shouldn't be spending time on it. This isn't necessarily tied to a longer hold period, but the other potential approach that we're thinking through is, do we deploy one of our generalists in a company, in a new investment, for the first 9, 12 months, 75% of their time, and say, here is your chief transformation officer. We're going to be very, very close, and we're going to make sure that we come out of the box strong. We're not there yet. There are obvious trade-offs, because if you put one person in a company 75% of the time, there are a lot of other companies they can't support. But I know some private equity firms have been successful with that model, so it's something we're thinking about.
I know when we've talked in the past, another thing you've talked about is people take free support. And so being really thoughtful about where you're providing that free support is so key. So as you've evolved your team, I know something you've been really thoughtful about is not expanding the team too quickly, because the more resources you have, people will take the free advice, right? And so how have you balanced scaling up your team, but not to the point of getting too bloated, and also to a point where you have effective resources, like not too little, not too much?
There's never unlimited money to just hire and hire and hire, and just being good stewards of our LP's money, we are thoughtful about when we want to add people. I think a forced scarcity, I think we had talked about this previously, I think there is a lot of value in that. So if you've got CEOs calling and begging for help over and over again, that may be a signal that you should add someone. If the phones aren't ringing, then you're probably at the right level of capacity.
Yeah, so that's the right signal for, should we add someone in this area, a second finance person or not?
I think that's one of them. And I'm not convinced that it makes sense to add more finance people or more technology people at our firm, because a lot of the value that our team provides is managing that best-in-breed network of third parties to plug into the right situation at the right time. It keeps our knowledge from getting stale because we're leveraging third parties who see lots of different situations at lots of different sponsors. And so we'll probably keep it at one leader per functional specialty going forward.
And look, curating that vendor network, huge part of the job of everybody in these roles. How have you evolved that network and ensuring that you're identifying, partnering with, and tracking successful partners, vendors, and management, people that you work with?
Well, sometimes you don't know until you try them. And I will say we don't want to rely on a single vendor in a single category. We want to make sure we've got multiple to go to. But I guess the lesson is that the more you work with a firm, or more you work with the one or two senior people at the firm who cover your account, the more they know how we do things, the more we know how they do things. Nothing ever goes as planned, and sometimes projects go awry. Having that relationship goes a long way towards getting the right outcome, even when things don't go right.
I think on the vendor side, you got to be a person that runs into the fire, not out of it. And to your point earlier, trust and partnership is built through communication. Early, often good news and bad news, that's just human nature, I think.
Yep, I agree. But not every professional service provider approaches it that way, in my experience.
What advice do you have for your professional services partner? How can they be better partners to private equity firms?
Don't tell us you can do something if you've never worked in that industry or on that specific project. Just say, this isn't the one for us. Mm-hmm. That credibility matters. And then trust. And being someone that I, as a client, feel comfortable confiding in and having a dialogue with, even if there's not a formal project, that relationship goes a long way as well.
It sounds like more centrally manage those relationships too.
Strategy planning during diligence or technology or finance or search firms are centralized in a way, but we don't have a mandate that every deal team needs to use a certain firm. Mm-hmm. They will typically look to our team for recommendations, and then we try to be unbiased and objective and say, here's the one we think's best, but this one could be good too. That would be more in the diligence and early period. When we're digging in with companies on projects, we'll make those recommendations directly to the company and then mutually decide who's best.
Yeah. And look, so much is fit for purpose. So you need multiple people.
Right.
Again, you have to pick your lanes, right? If you're an expert and a specialist, be an expert and a specialist.
And take executive search. We might have an executive search partner we think is great, but the personality may not mesh with a certain deal partner who's looking for that new CFO, and you say, look, this isn't the job for you. Get you the next time around because the chemistry wouldn't be there.
Yeah, I think that's a key point actually, because I see this on my side too, pointing people to the right partnerships. Well, I've done hundreds. Why didn't I get chosen? I have 100 searches in this area, but it has to be, again, the partnership, the chemistry, plus the credibility, the experience, and the track record.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. Do you have advice on, or points of view on how executive search is evolving alongside private equity and doing a better job getting you to the right CEOs faster and higher quality?
What I will say is too often, given how hard it is to find certain roles like CFOs, it's hard.
Yeah.
I won't say that our search partners necessarily give up, but at some point you stop seeing new candidates and they just seem exhausted, and we would naturally get frustrated. So there have been searches where we've said, okay, we're moving on to a new search firm.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a new phenomenon or if that's always been the case, but one of my big lessons learned, if I were in the shoes of an executive search partner, is just don't stop hustling.
Yeah. Always keep sourcing.
Yes.
And I think one of the lessons also is clients don't just want one answer. It needs to be one great person that you can hire, but there needs to be a backup. And ideally, a backup for the backup. 3 is ideal in any slate, and 2 for sure. You've described your job as part governance, part support, and what's the right balance of accountability versus autonomy when partnering with CEOs?
So we can't run a business. The CEO has to run the business. That CEO needs the autonomy to make the calls that he or she think are the right calls for the business. And we need to give them that space. At the same time, we have to hold them accountable. And I'd say too often, and I think this anecdotally, I think this goes across a lot of private equity, firms don't make changes in the leadership as early as they should. And in my experience, whenever we've done that, we've never regretted it, but it always seems like we wait too long because we don't hold them accountable and then follow up on that accountability. So we're trying to be better at that. Give the CEO autonomy, but hold them accountable.
Yeah. There's the human part of we want to give people a chance.
Yeah.
In order to get to clarity or get the performance of your management teams higher, what human capital practices and solutions do you regularly pull on to raise that bar?
So I'd say part of our playbook at the beginning of a new investment is using a third party to do at least a CEO assessment, oftentimes a CFO, and then I'd say at least half the time more of an organizational, C-suite organizational assessment, maybe lighter touch. We think it's really important to have that visibility going in, and then to talk to the CEO about the findings, as well as talk internally about our human capital plan when we think about what we learned through that process and incorporate that into the VCP. So that's a big part of our playbook. We've always talked about coaching, telling the CEOs it is okay to have an executive coach. That doesn't mean you're not up to the job. It's being a CEO is a lonely job. It's okay, and we would be supportive. We probably don't do that enough, and I don't know if CEOs take us up on that often enough, but I think that's also another important part of a playbook for getting off on the right foot.
That's good advice, too. Let's dive into another topic. You've experienced some real adversity in life. At the same time, you raised a family while building a demanding career.
Yeah.
What stayed constant in your leadership style, and what's evolved?
About a year into my tenure at McKinsey, I had a major stroke. Actually was at a client walking, all of a sudden had severe dizziness. Turned out it was a massive stroke. It took me a year to fully recover. I was back to work within a few weeks, but was fatigued for about a year. Walked away with a couple really important lessons that I don't think most 29-year-olds get. One being you can't let a major setback derail you from pursuing your goals. You have to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, get back at the plate. So that was, I think, an important lesson. And then you learn that life may not always be as long as you think it will be. And so you have a different perspective about what's important. Balance, don't sweat the small stuff, and certainly spend time with your family. And in your professional life, make sure you like what you do each and every day.
How do you think that made you a better leader?
Certainly being more, I'd say, accepting of people have other lives and kind of appreciating it, just like it's important to me. It's important to other people and encouraging them to do that. I don't know that everyone in private equity has that same approach to leading others. I think the not stressing out, having more composure when things don't go right, because at the end of the day, it's just work. It's not life and death. And so having that patience and composure to help the person on your team get through it and not overreact. I think those are a couple of styles or approaches that I developed as a result and try to live up to.
I think that's really good advice. I think this idea about bringing your whole self to work is a bigger part of the conversation and a healthy part of the conversation, because we have two sides in our lives, and if we can integrate them, I think the performance and the productivity gains come with that.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. What about a lesson that took you the longest to learn?
That's an easy one. When you start your career in professional services, you're focused on IQ, and as we talked about earlier, you go into a big multinational operating company, EQ becomes far more important. It took me too long to learn that.
And what about what motivates you most in your career?
Throughout my career, it's generally been having an impact and accomplishing things. I would say at this stage of my career, equally important is really, really enjoying what I do. Impact is still important, but having fun in my job is equally important.
What part of your job brings you the most joy or energy, you think?
Helping management team members be successful. We have a great culture at Vistria. The companies we invest in tend to have great cultures, great teams, and I just really enjoy working with people and helping them get done what they need to get done.
Yeah. When you have good collaboration, it's this like energy exchange, right?
I agree.
And you feed each other versus the other way around. Are there any habits or practices that help you personally show up as your best every day?
When I'm not traveling, I make a very concerted effort to get home for dinner with my family. And on the weekends, there's always going to be a little bit of work, but I try to make sure I'm there with my family. My wife, my kids are everything to me, and so having that fulfilling family life, I think, makes me a better professional.
And as you think about ways that help you to stay sharp and stay ahead, are there things you're listening to, or reading, and following, whether it's books, podcasts, other sources of inspiration that you recommend?
This is probably something most professionals would admit. I read fiction, mindless stuff. I don't pick up books that have anything heavy in it. I enjoy reading. I enjoy exercising.
Yeah.
And just trying to blow off steam.
Could you describe one of the most brilliant leaders you've worked with and why?
I would say at each stage of my career, there's someone who's been brilliant in their own right. So Goldman Sachs, there was someone who was an associate, a new associate. I was a new analyst, who was incredibly patient and composed despite all the stress, and really went out of his way to help the analysts get better and talk us off ledges when we got overly stressed. McKinsey, there was a partner who led a lot of the engagements I worked on, and he similarly was always helping me develop and me coach. And so I would say throughout my career, there have been really impactful leaders who've made a big difference in my career.
Look, you've reached the end. Each episode, we like to define brilliance in a few ways. So I'm going to hit you with a quick lightning round if you would be game.
All right.
Starting with purpose is?
Purpose is knowing what you have to do and why you have to do it.
Leadership is?
Leadership is surrounding yourself with people who have complementary skill sets and willingness to challenge, letting them run and helping them be successful.
I love that answer. Success is?
Success is the culmination of a lifetime of hard work. There are no shortcuts and there are no entitlements.
Brilliant leaders are?
Brilliant leaders are confident yet humble, good listeners, and people with very high integrity.
And brilliant value creation leaders are?
Brilliant value creation leaders are resourceful, trustworthy.
I perform at my best when?
I perform at my best when I'm working with people who are collaborative and comfortable when we hold each other accountable.
Amazing. Tory, thank you so much for joining us on this episode and for this conversation. I loved your stories, your insights, your expertise, and all the passion and the heart that you bring to the work that you do.
Thank you. Thanks for what you do, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you to Tory Ramaker of the Vistria Group for joining us today. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. That's it for this episode of the Brilliant People podcast. I'm Linnea Jungnelius. If you found this conversation valuable and if it sparked ideas for you, please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show, which helps us to bring even more brilliant guests like Tory to the show. And sign up on LinkedIn to follow a Certitude for the latest insights on how to lead and perform at your best. Until next time, stay brilliant at work and pursue something you love.